Some people lose their childhood in a single moment. Lily Parker sold hers for $43.17 and a can of tomato soup. The rain fell in cold sheets across the Brooklyn sidewalk, soaking through Lily's pink sneakers as she pushed her bicycle toward the pawn shop on Fulton Street. The little bell above the door jingled when she stepped inside, and every adult in the room looked at her for exactly 2 seconds before looking away again. That was New York. People learned not to stare too long at sadness. I remember tightening my fingers around the edge of the counter when I saw her. 8 years old, maybe 9. White blonde hair damp from the storm. Oversized yellow raincoat with one torn pocket hanging by loose threads. She could barely lift the bike onto the scale beside the register. "Can I help you?" the pawn shop owner asked without looking up from his coffee. Lily swallowed hard. "I wanna sell it." The man finally glanced at her, then at the bike. Pink frame. Scratches along the handlebars. A faded sticker of a cartoon rabbit peeling off the side. The kind of bike a little girl probably loved more than anything. "Where are your parents?" he asked. "My mom's sick." Her voice cracked on the last word. "She didn't eat yesterday, 'cause she said she wasn't hungry. But I heard her stomach." Something inside my chest shifted. I had walked into that shop for an entirely different reason. Men like me didn't usually notice children in places like that. We noticed threats. Money. Loyalty. Betrayal. But that little girl standing under fluorescent lights with rain dripping off her sleeves somehow silenced every conversation in the room without raising her voice once. The owner sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Kid, this thing's old." "It still works," she whispered quickly. "The brakes squeak a little but only when it's cold outside." She said it like she was defending a friend. I watched her unzip the tiny frog-shaped purse hanging across her shoulder. She pulled out 3 crumpled dollar bills and placed them carefully beside the bicycle seat. "Can I buy soup after?" she asked. "Or do I gotta wait?" The man stared at her for a long moment before clearing his throat. $40. Lily's eyes widened. "Really? Take it or leave it." She nodded immediately. Too quickly. Like she was afraid the offer would disappear if she breathed too hard. The man opened the register. Bills snapped beneath his fingers. $40 bills and some loose change slid across the counter. Lily picked them up carefully, counting twice under her breath. $43.17, she whispered with relief. Then she smiled. Actually smiled. Like she'd just won the lottery instead of selling the only thing a child should have been riding through summer streets. I should have walked away. That would have been the smart thing. My driver was waiting outside. My meeting downtown started in 20 minutes. Men feared me for a reason, and none of those reasons involved standing inside a pawn shop watching a little girl sacrifice her childhood for canned soup. But then Lily looked at the rack beside the register where her bicycle leaned for the last time. Her tiny hand touched the handlebars softly. "Bye, bunny bike," she whispered. "Thank you for helping my mommy." And just like that, I forgot about the meeting. Because I suddenly wanted to know who could take everything from a little girl, and still leave her with enough love to smile anyway. The soup containers were still warm in Lily's hands when she stepped back into the rain. I followed from half a block away, my coat collar pulled high against the wind while headlights reflected off puddles like broken glass. Brooklyn looked different in storms. Dirtier. Sadder. The city always revealed its truth when it rained. Lily stopped twice along the way. Once outside a pharmacy where she pressed her tiny hand against the window and stared at a bottle of cough medicine rotating slowly beneath fluorescent lights. The second time was outside a bakery closing for the night. She stood there for maybe 10 seconds breathing in the smell of fresh bread before pulling her hood tighter and walking away. That was the moment I realized the soup was not for both of them. The apartment building sat between a boarded laundromat and a liquor store covered in neon signs. 4 stories tall. Peeling paint. 1 broken security light. Flickering over the entrance like it was too tired to stay alive. Lily climbed the stairs slowly, careful not to spill the soup. I stayed across the street beneath the awning of a closed hardware store, watching her disappear into apartment 4B. "Boss?" my driver asked quietly beside me. "We are already 28 minutes late." "Go home, Marcus." He blinked once. "Sir." That was not a suggestion. Marcus looked toward the apartment window, then back at me. He had worked for me long enough not to ask questions when my tone changed like that. "Yes, sir." The black Escalade rolled away from the curb, leaving me alone with the rain and a feeling I had not recognized in years. Guilt. I crossed the street after the lights inside apartment 4B turned on. Thin curtains covered the windows, but there was a gap near the edge where I could see inside. Small kitchen. Old table. 1 lamp in the corner glowing weakly yellow. The kind of apartment where heat never fully reached the walls during winter. Lily set the soup containers down carefully before rushing toward the couch. "Mommy," she whispered. My jaw tightened. Grace Parker looked younger than I expected. Early 30s maybe. White. Thin in the way people became thin when life kept taking pieces from them. Dark blonde hair tangled against a faded gray blanket. She was asleep sitting upright, one hand pressed against her ribs while an unpaid electric bill rested open beside her. Lily touched her shoulder gently. "Mommy, wake up. I brought dinner." Grace opened her eyes slowly, confused at first until she saw the soup. "Lily," her voice sounded rough. "Baby, where did you get money for this?" "I helped somebody." A lie so soft it almost broke me. Grace pushed herself upright too quickly and winced. Lily immediately climbed onto the couch beside her. "I got chicken noodle because you like that one." "Sweetheart," Grace looked close to tears now. "Did you ask people for money again?" "No." Lily shook her head hard. "I promised I would not." Grace pulled her daughter into her arms and held her there for a long moment. I could not hear everything through the rain, but I heard enough. "You are not supposed to take care of me," Grace whispered against Lily's hair. "That is my job." Lily answered with the honesty only children carried. "But you look tired all the time." Silence filled the apartment after that. Heavy silence. The kind that came from too many months surviving instead of living. Then Grace glanced toward the kitchen counter, toward the pawn ticket sticking halfway out of Lily's raincoat pocket. Her entire face changed. Fear. Heartbreak. Understanding. "Lily," she whispered carefully. "Where is your bicycle?" And for the first time all night, the little girl started crying. There are sounds a man never forgets once he hears them. The click of a gun being loaded. The silence before betrayal. And the sound of a child apologizing for trying to feed her mother. Lily cried quietly into Grace's sweater, small shoulders shaking while rain tapped softly against the apartment windows. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I just wanted you to eat something." Grace closed her eyes like the words physically hurt her. "Baby, you never have to apologize for loving me." Her voice broke halfway through the sentence. I looked away from the window for exactly 1 second because suddenly standing there felt wrong. Too personal. Too close to something sacred. But when I looked back, Grace was wiping tears from Lily's cheeks with trembling fingers while pretending to smile. Pretending for her daughter. People like me noticed survival instincts. We built empires around them. And Grace Parker had the exhausted eyes of someone who had been surviving for a very long time. Lily finally pulled the pawn ticket from her pocket and handed it over slowly. "I can get Bunny bike back later," she whispered. "When we have money again." Grace stared at the paper in silence. Then she looked toward the kitchen cabinets. Empty. Toward the bottle of pills beside the sink. Nearly empty too. I watched her make the kind of decision parents made every day without anyone applauding them for it. She folded the pawn ticket carefully and slipped it into her pocket. "We are getting your bike back tomorrow," she said softly. Lily sniffled. "Really? Really? But how?" Grace forced another smile. "I will figure it out." The problem with lies told by good people is that they sound hopeful even when they are impossible. I knew that smile. I had seen versions of it on mothers visiting hospitals in Queens. On fathers signing loans they could never repay. On men pretending they still believed life would eventually become fair. Grace stood slowly from the couch and nearly lost her balance. Lily grabbed her hand immediately. "Mommy. I am okay." She was not okay. Even from across the street I could see how pale she looked beneath the apartment light. She moved carefully toward the counter and opened a folder stuffed with paperwork. Medical bills. Eviction notices. Late payment stamps in angry red letters. Then one document caught my attention because I recognized the logo immediately. Reed and Holloway Legal Group. My expression hardened. Victor Reed. Of course. Some men wore expensive suits to hide the fact they were thieves. Victor Reed happened to be very good at it. Grace pulled out another envelope and stared at it for several seconds before shoving it back into the folder like she could not bear reading it again. Lily climbed beside her at the tiny kitchen table. "Did the bad man send more letters?" Grace froze. Bad man. Children always reduced complicated monsters into simple truths. "You do not worry about him," Grace whispered. "Okay. But he made you cry." Grace touched Lily's cheek gently. "Some people only know how to take things from others." The sentence settled into my chest heavier than it should have. Because she had no idea who was standing outside her building listening. She had no idea I built my entire world around taking things too. The difference was I never pretended otherwise. A pair of headlights swept across the apartment suddenly. Grace tensed immediately. Real fear this time. She rushed to the window and peeked through the curtain before stepping back quickly. Lily noticed it too. "Is it him again?" Grace did not answer right away. That told me enough. I turned toward the black sedan parked across the street beneath the broken street lamp. Engine running. Driver waiting inside. Watching the building. Watching them. And for the first time that night, something cold settled quietly into my bloodstream. Because I realized this was not just poverty. Someone had been making sure Grace Parker stayed broken. The sedan stayed parked across the street for another 11 minutes. I counted. Men in my world survived by counting everything. Time. Silence. Fear. The driver never stepped out. Never smoked. Never checked his phone. He just sat there watching apartment 4B while rain slid across the windshield in silver streaks. That told me more than violence ever could. Real predators did not always bare their teeth. Sometimes they just waited long enough for people to stop sleeping peacefully. Upstairs, Grace finally closed the curtains completely. The apartment lights dimmed except for the kitchen lamp. Lily sat cross-legged on the couch eating soup slowly while her mother pretended to drink water instead of taking the larger portion for herself. "Mommy," Lily asked quietly, "are we gonna have to move again?" Grace froze halfway through folding a blanket. There it was. The kind of question children should never know to ask. "No," Grace answered carefully. "Why would you think that?" Lily shrugged one shoulder. "Because last time you cried after reading letters too." Grace turned away quickly, but not before I saw the look on her face. Exhaustion mixed with humiliation. Like life had slowly trained her to expect bad news every time the mail arrived. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and made one call. "Find everything you can on Grace Parker," I said the second Marcus answered. "Financials. Legal history. Medical debt. Start with Victor Reed. Marcus went silent for exactly half a heartbeat. You think Reed is involved personally? I know he is. How fast do you need it? I looked back toward the apartment window glowing softly through the storm. Yesterday. I hung up before he could ask more questions. People always assumed power looked loud. Expensive watches. Armed guards. Black cars. But real power was information delivered before sunrise. Upstairs, Lily had fallen asleep against Grace's shoulder. The little girl still wore her sneakers like she expected life might force her to run again at any moment. Grace brushed damp hair away from Lily's forehead with gentle fingers before finally allowing herself to cry. Quietly. Carefully. Like she had practiced doing it in silence so her daughter would not hear. Something ugly twisted beneath my ribs. I hated tears. Not because they made me uncomfortable. Because they reminded me that no amount of money ever stopped people from breaking. My phone buzzed 23 minutes later. Marcus. Boss, he said immediately, you were right. I stepped farther beneath the awning, away from passing traffic. Talk. Papers shuffled on his end. Grace Parker's husband died 3 years ago in a construction accident. Insurance payout should have been close to $800,000. Should have. Those 2 words already told me enough. Victor Reed represented her during settlement negotiations, Marcus continued. 3 months later the money disappeared through shell investments connected to Reed and Holloway. My expression hardened slowly. He stole from a widow. Looks that way. What about the apartment? Owned by another Reed subsidiary. They have been raising rent every 4 months. Of course they had. Bleed people slowly enough and eventually they blamed themselves for dying. There is more, Marcus said quietly. Grace filed 2 complaints with the State Bar Association against Victor Reed. Both disappeared. Rain drummed harder against the sidewalk now. Somewhere nearby a siren echoed through Brooklyn traffic. And the sedan? I asked. Marcus did not hesitate. Registered to Reed Security Consultants. I looked up toward apartment 4B again. Grace was carrying Lily toward the bedroom now, moving carefully so she would not wake her. The little girl's tiny hand still clutched the empty soup container even in sleep. My jaw tightened so hard it hurt. Because suddenly this stopped being business. 3 years earlier another man had died believing his family would be protected after he was gone. Instead they got hunted by paperwork and fear until an 8-year-old child sold her bicycle for canned soup. Marcus spoke again carefully. Boss? Yes. What do you want us to do? I stared at the apartment light glowing softly against the storm. Then I answered with a calmness that frightened even me. I want Victor Reed to learn the difference between taking money from people and taking hope from a child. By morning the rain had stopped, but Brooklyn still looked washed in gray. I had not slept. Men like me rarely did when anger settled into our bloodstream. Marcus handed me a paper coffee outside the townhouse while another black SUV idled near the curb. Victor Reed has a breakfast meeting at 9, he said. Upper East Side. Private club. I took the coffee without drinking it. Cancel my morning. Marcus glanced up carefully. You are personally handling this? Does that surprise you? Honestly? He hesitated. Yes. Fair enough. Dominic Hayes was not known for rescuing strangers. My reputation existed because I stayed detached. Controlled. Emotion made people careless. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw a little girl saying goodbye to her bicycle like it was family. That had a way of ruining perspective. What about Grace Parker? I asked. Marcus opened the folder in his hands. 3 part-time jobs in 2 years. Hospital debt after pneumonia complications last winter. She stopped filling her prescription 3 weeks ago because insurance denied coverage. I stared at the traffic moving slowly through Manhattan streets. And Reed kept pushing eviction notices anyway. Yes, sir. Of course he did. Men like Victor Reed always knew exactly how much suffering they could legally justify on paper. That was what made them dangerous. Not cruelty. Professionalism. There is one more thing, Marcus said quietly. Grace's husband. Daniel Parker. The name sounded vaguely familiar. Marcus handed me another page. Construction site incident. 3 years old. My eyes stopped halfway down the report. Then everything inside me went completely still. That is impossible, I said softly. Marcus did not answer. Because it was not impossible. I remembered Daniel Parker immediately after seeing the photo clipped to the file. Tall guy. Blonde beard. Army veteran. Worked private security on one of my shipping sites years ago before leaving for construction work. Daniel had once pulled me out of an SUV after a highway collision during winter ice outside Albany. The car could have rolled into the river if he had not broken the window fast enough. I remembered standing in freezing water while he laughed and said, "Guess somebody upstairs still likes you, Mr. Hayes." I had offered him money afterward. A lot of it. He refused every dollar. Said helping people was just what decent men did. Decent men. Funny how rare they became once money entered the room. He died 2 months after refusing Reed's investment proposal, Marcus continued carefully. Grace believed the settlement money would take care of Lily. I looked down at Daniel Parker's photo again. Smiling beside a little girl holding a pink bicycle with training wheels. My chest tightened painfully. That was Bunny Bike, I realized out loud. Marcus frowned slightly. Sir. Nothing. Silence stretched between us while Manhattan rushed around the car windows. Finally Marcus spoke again. What are your orders? Orders. The word almost made me laugh. Because this no longer felt like business strategy. It felt personal. I want every account tied to Victor Reed audited by noon, I said calmly. Every shell company frozen. Every illegal transfer exposed. Marcus nodded immediately. And the eviction? Gone. Today. I looked back at Daniel Parker's smiling photograph one last time before closing the folder. A little girl already sold her bicycle trying to save her mother, I said quietly. Nobody is taking their home too. 3 hours later I stood inside the same pawn shop on Fulton Street while the owner nervously wiped his hands against his apron. Bunny Bike leaned beside the counter exactly where Lily left it. Small. Pink. Scratched handlebars. Sir, the owner stammered, if this is about the kid yesterday, I swear I gave her a fair deal. I pulled several folded bills from my coat pocket and placed them on the counter. You did more for her than most people would. The man blinked in confusion. Then, why are you here? I picked up the bicycle carefully. Rainwater still clung to the tires from the night before. Because some things should never have been sold in the first place. The first eviction notice disappeared at 8:14 that morning. The second vanished 30 minutes later. By noon, every late fee attached to Grace Parker's apartment had been erased from the system like they had never existed at all. Money moved quietly when powerful people became interested. Fear moved even faster. I sat in the back office of Bellamy Financial downtown while 3 accountants in expensive suits tried not to look nervous around me. Screens glowed across the room displaying wire transfers, shell corporations, and property records connected to Victor Reed. The deeper we dug, the uglier the picture became. He had done this to dozens of people. Widows. Retired couples. Families drowning in medical debt. He targeted desperation because desperate people rarely had the strength to fight back. How much? I asked calmly. One accountant adjusted his glasses with shaky fingers. Estimated fraudulent assets tied to Reed Holdings exceed $12 million. $12 million. Built from people skipping meals and selling memories to survive. Marcus leaned beside the conference table reviewing another file. Federal investigators will bury him if this leaks. Good, I answered simply. My phone buzzed before anyone could speak again. Unknown number. I almost ignored it until instinct told me not to. Hello. Silence greeted me first. Soft breathing. Then a tiny voice. Mr. Hayes. I froze. Marcus looked up immediately. Lily? Yeah. She sounded nervous now, like she regretted calling already. I found your number on the card the bike shop man gave me. I remembered leaving my business card with the owner that morning in case the child came back looking for her bicycle. Are you okay? I asked quietly. Mommy fainted at work. Every muscle in my body tightened instantly. What happened? The manager at the diner said she got dizzy and fell down. They took her to Brooklyn Memorial. Her voice became smaller after that. I do not know what to do. I was already standing before the call ended. Listen to me carefully, Lily. My tone softened automatically. Are you alone? I am in the waiting room. Stay exactly where you are. I am coming. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee when I arrived 22 minutes later. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead while exhausted nurses moved through crowded hallways pushing carts and paperwork. Lily sat alone in a plastic chair near the emergency entrance, feet dangling above the floor because she was too small for the seat. Her yellow raincoat from the night before hung loosely around her shoulders. The second she saw me, relief flooded her face so suddenly it nearly stopped my heart. Like she had been waiting for someone to tell her things would be okay. No child should look at me that way. I crouched in front of her carefully. Hey, kid. Lily stood and wrapped her tiny arms around my neck before I could react. I went completely still. Men feared my hands. Negotiated with them. Bled because of them sometimes. But this little girl trusted them instantly. They said mommy needs rest, she whispered shakily. But she keeps saying she has to go back to work. I looked toward the hallway beyond the nurse's station. Which room? Lily pointed silently. Grace looked pale against the hospital bed. An 4-line rested beside her arm while monitors beeped softly in the background. She turned her head when I entered and immediately stiffened with alarm. Who are you? She asked hoarsely. Fair question. Men like me did not usually appear beside hospital beds carrying pink bicycles. I set Bunny bike gently against the wall near the window. Lily gasped behind me. Mommy, Grace stared at the bicycle first. Then at me. Confusion slowly overtook fear. You bought it back, she whispered. I nodded once. Grace's eyes filled instantly, but unlike the night before, she looked angry about it. You should not have done that. Probably not. We do not need charity. There it was again. Pride surviving inside people long after comfort disappeared. I respected that more than she realized. Lily rushed toward the bicycle, touching the handlebars like she was afraid it might disappear again. Grace watched her daughter smiling for the first time in days before looking back at me carefully. Why are you helping us? She asked softly. I held her gaze for several quiet seconds. Then I answered with the truth. Because your husband once saved my life. The room went completely silent after I said Daniel Parker's name. Grace looked at me like the world had suddenly tilted sideways beneath her feet. Lily sat beside Bunny bike holding the handlebars while hospital machines hummed softly in the background. Outside the window, evening rain had started falling again over Brooklyn rooftops. You knew Daniel? Grace finally whispered. I nodded once. A long time ago. Her eyes narrowed carefully. Protective now. How? Fair question. Most women did not expect men in tailored black coats to walk into hospitals carrying old bicycles and memories of their dead husbands. I pulled the visitor chair closer to the bed but stayed standing. Something about sitting felt too familiar for a woman who still looked ready to ask security to remove me. 3 winters ago my car lost control near Albany during an ice storm, I said quietly. Your husband pulled me out before the guardrail collapsed into the river. Grace stared at me without blinking. Daniel never told me that story. He probably did not think it mattered. But it mattered to me. Men remembered the people who reached into freezing water without asking what kind of man they were saving first. Lily looked between us with wide blue eyes. Daddy saved you? Yes. Her small face softened immediately like that explained everything. Children trusted simple truths adults complicated. Good people recognized other good people. Grace was not as easily convinced. If Daniel knew you, she said slowly, then why are you only showing up now? There it was. The real question underneath all the others. Where were you while we were drowning? I accepted the hit because she deserved that much. I did not know what happened after his death, I answered honestly. I should have. Grace looked away toward the rain streaking the hospital window. Nobody came after he died, she whispered. Not really. Her voice sounded smaller now. More tired than angry. The company blamed the accident. The insurance stalled for months. Victor Reed promised he would protect us. I already knew the rest, but hearing it from her made my jaw tighten anyway. He said Daniel would want us taken care of, Grace continued softly. I trusted him. Lily climbed carefully onto the bed beside her mother and rested against her shoulder. Grace wrapped one arm around her automatically like breathing. Then the money disappeared, she whispered. The apartment payments doubled. Every time I tried fighting back, another letter showed up. Another bill. Another threat about court. She laughed once after that, but there was no humor in it. Just exhaustion. Do you know what the worst part is? I stayed quiet. Grace looked down at Lily's hair while stroking it gently. I stopped recognizing myself. The words settled heavily between us. I used to paint, she whispered. Daniel said I laughed too loud during movies. I used to dance around the kitchen while cooking breakfast. Her eyes glistened now. Then survival became a full-time job. Lily hugged her tighter immediately. You still dance sometimes, she whispered. Grace smiled through tears. Tiny. Fragile. Real. And suddenly I understood exactly what Victor Reed stole from them. Not money. Time. Joy. Safety. Little pieces of being human. A knock sounded against the half-open hospital door. Marcus stepped inside wearing a dark charcoal coat still damp from rain. One look at my face told him everything. Sir, he said carefully, handing me a folder. The transfer documents are confirmed. I opened the file slowly. Shell accounts. Forged signatures. Illegal property acquisitions tied directly to Reed Holdings. More than enough to destroy Victor Reed publicly without anyone ever knowing my involvement. Grace watched my expression shift. What is that? She asked quietly. I closed the folder again before answering. Proof. Proof of what? I looked directly at her. That you were never crazy, Grace. Her breath caught softly. Because sometimes the cruelest thing people do to victims is convince them their suffering is normal. Lily glanced toward me suddenly. Are you going to help my mommy? The question hit harder than threats ever had. I looked at the little girl clutching her mother's hand beneath harsh hospital lights while rain tapped against the windows like restless fingers. Then I answered carefully. No, kid. Lily blinked in confusion. Grace did too. I held their gaze steadily. I am going to make sure nobody ever takes from your family again. Victor Reed smiled too much for a man being quietly destroyed. I noticed that immediately when I walked into the private dining room overlooking Central Park the next evening. Expensive whiskey glowed amber beneath chandelier light while New York's elite laughed around polished oak tables pretending corruption looked sophisticated in tailored suits. Victor stood near the windows shaking hands with investors like he belonged among honest men. He did not see me at first. Most predators never noticed another one entering the room until it was too late. Marcus moved beside me silently. Federal auditors froze 3 offshore accounts this afternoon, he murmured. Reed has been trying to contact his banks for 2 hours. Good. Let him feel uncertainty creeping in around the edges. Fear arrived slowly before it swallowed people whole. Victor finally turned toward us and froze for half a second. Just half. Then the polished smile returned. Dominic Hayes, he said smoothly while extending his hand. This is unexpected. I ignored the hand completely. We need to talk. His expression flickered almost invisibly. Men like Victor survive by reading danger quickly. Of course, he answered lightly. Private room? That would be wise. The smaller office behind the dining hall smelled like cigar smoke and old money. Victor closed the door carefully before adjusting his tie. To what do I owe the pleasure? Pleasure. Funny word. I stepped closer slowly enough for him to understand exactly how serious this conversation was without anyone raising their voice. Grace Parker. His face changed instantly. Not guilt. Irritation. Like hearing her name inconvenienced him. I assumed this was business-related, he sighed. It is. Dominic, with respect, that woman made unfortunate financial decisions after her husband died. I simply protected my firm's interests. I stared at him for several quiet seconds. You stole from a widow. Victor laughed softly like I was being dramatic. Please. Nobody survives in New York without learning how contracts work. Contracts. There it was again. People hiding cruelty behind paperwork. Her daughter sold a bicycle so they could eat, I said calmly. Something cold entered my voice then because suddenly I pictured Lily standing in the pawn shop again holding rainwater in her sleeves while this man drank $1,000 whiskey downtown. Victor shifted uncomfortably for the first time. That is unfortunate, he admitted. But hardly my responsibility. Wrong answer. Very wrong answer. I placed the folder Marcus prepared onto the desk between us. Bank transfers. Fraudulent signatures. Property manipulation. Every hidden transaction tied neatly together with enough evidence to bury him permanently. Victor's color drained page by page. Where did you get this? He whispered. That is not important. He looked up sharply now. You cannot prove criminal intent. Actually, I interrupted softly, I can. Silence filled the office. Heavy. Suffocating. Victor swallowed hard before trying a different approach. Dominic, men like us understand leverage. Men like us. The phrase almost offended me. No, I answered quietly. You mistake greed for power. I stepped closer until panic finally appeared behind his eyes. Power is having the ability to destroy someone and deciding exactly how much mercy they deserve. Victor's breathing changed slightly after that. Faster now. What do you want? Finally. The truth beneath every expensive suit in Manhattan. Fear always stripped people down to honesty eventually. I looked directly into his eyes when I answered. Every dollar returned. That is impossible. Then prison becomes very possible. He stared at the documents again with trembling fingers. And the apartment? I asked. Transferred back to Grace Parker immediately. Victor closed his eyes briefly like his entire empire was collapsing behind them. Maybe it was. You are ruining me over one family, he whispered. I thought about Grace crying quietly in the dark because she thought nobody was coming. I thought about Daniel Parker pulling strangers from freezing water. I thought about Lily apologizing for trying to feed her mother. Then I looked back at Victor Reed and realized something important. Cruel men always believed kindness was small because they had never witnessed what people survived for love. No, I answered calmly. You ruined yourself the moment you forgot poor people are still people. 3 weeks later, the first thing Lily did every morning was check the window for the black SUV. She tried pretending she was not looking for it, but children were terrible liars when they cared about someone. Brooklyn had finally started warming up after weeks of rain. Sunlight spilled across apartment 4B now instead of darkness, and somehow even the walls looked less tired. The eviction notices were gone. The electricity stayed on. Grace had color in her face again. Small miracles. The kind most people never noticed because they had never lived without them. I stood outside the building one quiet Saturday afternoon holding 2 coffees while Marcus spoke into his phone nearby. Across the street, Lily rode Bunny bike in uneven circles along the sidewalk, laughing every time the front wheel squeaked. Grace sat on the apartment steps watching her daughter with one hand wrapped around a paper cup of tea. Wind lifted loose strands of blonde hair across her face while sunlight touched skin that no longer looked ghost pale beneath stress and exhaustion. Healing was strange like that. It happened slowly until one day somebody smiled without forcing it. Grace noticed me first. Her expression shifted immediately between caution and something softer she had not fully decided to trust yet. You keep showing up, she said as I walked closer. I have been told I am difficult to get rid of. The corner of her mouth lifted slightly. Tiny smile. Real one. I handed her the coffee carefully. Vanilla latte. Less sugar. She blinked once in surprise. You remembered? I shrugged lightly. You drink the same thing every hospital visit. Grace looked down at the cup for a second too long. Some people were not used to being noticed in gentle ways. Lily spotted me then and nearly crashed Bunny bike into the curb trying to stop too fast. Dominic, she yelled before. Speeding toward us. She jumped off the bicycle and wrapped both arms around my waist like she had done it 100 times before. I still had not gotten used to that. Maybe I never would. Guess what? She asked excitedly. Mommy got hired at the art studio downtown. Grace laughed softly behind her. Part-time only. Still counts, Lily argued immediately. I get to paint after school there sometimes. I looked toward Grace. Congratulations. Her eyes met mine over Lily's head. I heard the building owner suddenly lowered the rent too. I sipped my coffee calmly. New management can be very compassionate. Grace shook her head slowly, but I caught the warmth hidden behind the gesture. She knew. Maybe not every detail. But enough. Marcus approached quietly then, handing me a folder. Everything is finalized, he murmured. Reed accepted the settlement agreement this morning. Grace stiffened slightly at Victor Reed's name. I opened the folder and removed a single document before handing it to her. What is this? She asked carefully. Daniel Parker's original insurance payout, I answered. Recovered legally. Grace stared at the number printed across the page. Her breath caught immediately. This cannot be real. It is yours. She looked up at me slowly, eyes already filling before she blinked the tears away. Dominic, your husband saved my life, I interrupted gently. I think he already paid for this years ago. Silence settled around us after that. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind people shared when emotions became too large for words. Lily leaned against Bunny bike humming softly while traffic rolled through Brooklyn streets behind us. Finally Grace whispered the question I think she had been carrying since the hospital. Why would someone like you care this much? Someone like you. Mafia boss. Dangerous man. The kind mothers warned their daughters about. Maybe she was right too. I looked toward Lily riding slow circles beneath golden afternoon sunlight while laughing at absolutely nothing. Then I looked back at Grace Parker. Because your daughter reminded me what good people look like, I answered honestly. Grace stared at me for a long moment. After that. Then, for the first time since we met, she smiled without sadness hiding behind it. And somehow that felt more dangerous than every enemy I had ever faced combined. Because power could buy loyalty. Fear could buy silence. But moments like this? They had to be earned. And maybe that was the closest thing to redemption men like me would ever get.